getting a bishop trapped might be a bit embarrassing. That's why today we're going to learn very common opening traps to either avoid getting our bishops trapped or to be the ones trapping our opponent's bishops. So let's get started with the first trap. After e4, e5, knight to f3, and knight to c6, the move bishop to e5 is very common in this position, which leads the game to the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game. And here the move a6 is the most common move in the position. Bishop to a4 is also the main move. Taking on c6 is possible, but after black captures with the d-pawn, black gets a solid position, so bishop to a4 in this particular position is the most common, keeping the tension. And here knight to f6 is the most common reply by black, but if you haven't studied the move d6, you should be aware of this move because this is quite a tricky move. In this position, the most common way to continue is to either castle or to go c3 straight away, preparing d4. Taking on c6 here is possible because in this position black will capture with the b-pawn. But here you should be aware about a move that you should not play, or if you play you should know how to follow it up, which is the move d4. This is a very natural move, that's why this trap is quite dangerous, because white is playing very natural moves and might end up losing in just a few moves. So here black plays the move b5, and after bishop to b3, knight takes c4. Here white has to take because black might plan to take on b3, so after knight takes and pawn takes, here we get the critical position where white has to be very careful. So in this position I will start with the most common move, which is the one that you might play if you haven't started this position before, which is to capture the pawn on d4. And this move is actually losing for white, that's why you need to be very careful about this position, because here black has a very strong move c5, with the idea to follow up with c4, simply trapping the bishop. Even though here white might try to complicate the game by going queen to d5, with the idea to either take on f7 or to take the rook on a8, that's why here the move c4 would be bad for black, because after c4, white would capture the rook on a8, but here black still has a very strong continuation, which is bishop to e6, attacking the queen and planning to go c4. The only way to stop c4 is by giving a check with queen to c6, but after bishop to d7 and queen to d5, now black can play the move c4, because the rook is now defended by the queen, and the bishop on b3 is going to fall, and black is getting a winning position. So I just want to mention that in this position taking on d4 is bad. White still has other options, but black is doing fine after them. For example, white might play bishop to d5 first, and then plan to capture on d4. This might be an idea. Or another move might be to go c3. Other options are possible, like going a4, but c3 has the idea to sacrifice a pawn, and after pawn takes, white might take with the knight, getting fairly good compensation for the pawn, because white has a lead in development. Or in this particular position, white actually has the move queen to d5 with a similar idea, with this fork on a8 and f7. And in this position, since the pawn is on c7, white gets a repetition after bishop to e6, queen to c6, giving a check. The queen cannot go to d7 because the rook on a8 is hanging, so after bishop to d7 and queen to d5, here in this position black doesn't have the move c4, that's why black should repeat the position by going bishop to e6 and queen to c6. In any case, forcing a repetition as white doesn't look very attractive, so if you have this line after d6, I would suggest that you don't play the move d4, because you have to play correctly to have an equal position, but you might play something else like castling or going c3. So let's now study another very similar trap. After e4 and c5, here we get a Sicilian defense, and after knight to f3 and knight to c6, white has many options. One of them is to go bishop to b5, and here we get the Rossolimo variation in the Sicilian defense. And here there's a big difference because there's a pawn on c5 and not on e5. And here black normally goes c6 or e6. Other moves are possible, but going a6 is normally something that black doesn't play, at least at the very high level, because they know that this is a basic trap, and white's main idea is to capture on c6 in this setup. Because after a6, if white doesn't capture on c6 and goes bishop to a4, this is actually a very bad move, because after b5, bishop to b3, and c4, the bishop is trapped. But in any case, at least in one of your games, you might try going a6 if you have this position as black, and here white should definitely take on c6, and in this particular position you can take either with d-pawn or with the b-pawn. So let's now check another position on which a bishop can get trapped. Here we have the Caro Kann defense after e4, c6, d4 and d5. The move e5 leads the game to the advanced variation, And here c5 is a common move, but also bishop to f5. It makes sense that after e5, black has the f5 square for the bishop, so bishop to f5 is a very logical move. And here white can continue with the developing move like knight to f3, this is very common, but here the move h4 is actually quite interesting, because players who are not very familiar with this position might follow up with the move e6. I just want to mention that here the move h5 is the most common move, or h6, which prevents the move g4, or it gives the h7 square for the bishop. So after h5, the bishop has an additional square to retreat. But here the move e6, from a positional point of view, it makes a lot of sense, because black has the idea to go c5, and now the square c5 is covered by the bishop. That's the main idea of the move e6. The knight might develop to c6 after black plays c5, so it makes a lot of sense. But this move actually fails, because after the move g4, black will get the bishop trapped, since after bishop to g6 or bishop to e4, white will simply attack the bishop. For example, after bishop to g6, h5, and bishop to e4 is the only square to keep the bishop, but after f3, white is trapping the bishop and having a decisive material advantage. And in the last trap, it is the one who traps the bishop, the one that actually gets punished, because we should never trap a bishop blindly, particularly if that means weakening our king or making a lot of pawn moves. So here after the move d4 and f5, we get the Dutch defense, and here white normally goes knight to f3 or g3, but the move bishop to g5 is an interesting move, pinning this pawn in e7, and with the idea to change the pawn structure after knight to f6, capturing on f6, and a very natural idea here is to attack the bishop by going h6. And here white normally goes bishop to h4, which invites black to attack the bishop further by going g5. And in this particular position, white might actually avoid getting the bishop trapped straight away by going e3, with the idea of going queen to h5. That would give a checkmate, that's why black is not in time to capture the bishop. This is perfectly playable, but it is also interesting to play bishop to g3 here, inviting black to trap the bishop, because in this particular position it is actually a bad move for black. So here black should start developing the other pieces, for example play knight to f6, because the move f4 is actually quite a bad mistake, because white gets this idea of going e3, planning to capture on f4, and going queen to h5 checkmate. That's why here taking the bishop would finish the game after queen to h5, and we see the risk of trapping a bishop at any cost, particularly when you push your kingside pawns. And if you manage to get your opponent in this position and you're playing against a very strong player, I just want to mention one idea that black might try to complicate the game, which is the move e5. So the idea of the move e5 is to give a square for the king, and here we're gonna capture on f4, queen to h5 would lead to the same position, and if black wants to trap the bishop, black will play e takes f5. Since if black takes with the g-pawn, after queen to h5 and king to e7, we have bishop to h4, this position is just crushing for white, this pawn is going to fall, this king is weak, so this is not black's idea. But after e takes f4, now we're gonna play bishop takes, so we're going to give the bishop, and after pawn takes, queen to h5, and king to e7, now we get this idea of queen to e5, giving a check and attacking the rook, so we're getting the material back and even winning more material. So here after king to f7, here we could play bishop to c4, or probably even simply is to go queen takes. And here I just want to mention that even though we get an extra material advantage, again if you're playing against a very strong player, you might have to be a bit careful, because here there's the idea to go knight to f6, and this queen doesn't have squares for the time being. And there's the additional idea now to go bishop to b4, giving a check, and then capturing the queen on h8. That's why we're gonna play knight to c3, blocking any possible checks. And after black develops, we're gonna castle long. Now we get ideas to go bishop to c4. That's why black might try d5. And now we get this idea to free the queen by going bishop to b5, and then knight to f3 and knight to e5. For example here, black might try queen to d6 as a sharp option, with the idea to go bishop to g7, trapping the queen, but black is not in time. So here we're gonna capture on c6, and if black goes bishop to g7, here we are in time by going bishop takes e5 check, and after knight takes, queen to h7, now the queen is going back, we keep a better position and a material advantage. Or after bishop takes and pawn takes, now we're in time with knight to f3 and knight to e5. For example, after bishop to g7, we play this idea, knight to e5, If the king moves, we're gonna capture the bishop on g7, or if black takes on e5, then we get the intermediate move, queen takes, and after king takes, pawn takes, we keep the extra exchange and a better position. So this is a more advanced trap, but just keep in mind that after d4, f5, bishop to g5, h6, bishop to h4, g5, in this position we could play e3 straight away, but even invite our opponent to go f4 after bishop to g3, since after f4 we get the move e3 with the very strong idea of queen to h5. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This will help me a lot to grow my channel. That's it for now. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.